There are new calls today for Prince Andrew to speak with the FBI and to step down from royal duties. They come after he gave a TV interview about his ties to sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and allegations made against him.
One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
Prince Andrew is now facing backlash, with critics saying he appeared arrogant, inconsistent, and hard to believe. Many say he should testify under oath and step down from his royal duties. Megan Batchelor is following this story for us. So, Megan, how are Epstein's victims reacting to all of this?
Well, Andrew Epstein's victims, those investigators involved with this, their lawyers, people in the UK, everyone's sort of scratching their heads after this interview aired over the weekend on the BBC in the UK. A lot of people talking about this and reacting. So this was an hour-long interview that aired following months of headlines talking about the ties between Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein. We know he died by suicide in his jail cell while he was awaiting charges, a trial on his sex trafficking charges. He had previously been convicted with sex-related offenses in the early 2000s in Florida. In the news that broke around these most recent charges, there were allegations too swirling around Prince Andrew himself. Prince Andrew, we know, is Queen Elizabeth's second son, the brother to Prince Charles. So now Prince Andrew, after this interview is aired, has been urged to not only speak to the media, but also to get in touch with FBI investigators in the United States as they continue their investigation around Epstein and those allegations. So we heard recently from a lawyer representing a lot of these victims, Gloria Allred. She had a press conference this hour along with Jane Doe 15. She is alleging, she's making accusations against Epstein as well. She was 15 years old when those happened. It's important to note here, this alleged victim is not making any accusations around Prince Andrew himself, but she and her lawyer are joining the call of voices, really urging Prince Andrew to now talk to investigators. Take a listen.
Called on Prince Andrew to voluntarily speak with law enforcement in the United States, that's the FBI, and he should do that as soon as possible.
Prince Andrew and any others who are close to Epstein should come forward and give a statement under oath on what information they have. All the information pertaining to and around this case is important.
The conversation following this hour-long interview on the BBC has also hit the Parliament in UK. Policy lawmakers and politicians debated this as well, and the Prime Minister himself avoiding comment on this, saying he doesn't want to get involved with affairs around the royal family. Overall, Andrew, this is being regarded as a bit of a PR disaster for the royal family.
Yeah, sure has. What's been the general reaction to this interview, or how Prince Andrew came across?
Yeah, just his tone itself is also the center of a lot of conversation. At times he appeared disconnected, quite soft when it came to talking about being tied to this man who was a convicted sex offender. There was one point in the interview where the interviewer asked him why he chose to stay at Epstein's house in New York, and the prince cited convenience, said that it was more convenient for him to stay at Epstein's house while staying in New York. That really scratched a lot of heads because he's part of the royal family. He should be able to stay wherever he wants. And so here's another clip from that interview that really shows that sort of attitude that people are talking about today. Take a listen.
As far as my association with him was concerned, it had some seriously beneficial outcomes in areas that have nothing to do with what I would describe as what we're talking about today. Do I regret the fact that he has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes.
Unbecoming? He was a sex offender.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm being polite.
Yeah, and it was that polite attitude that really had people talking. And here's how people on the streets of London were reacting to that interview as well. Take a listen.
I can't believe he didn't even apologise or did anything remotely to just say sorry, or it was just all about him. So that's all I can say about that.
Doesn't look good on the establishment, really, does it? You know, I mean, they tried to uphold this sense of, you know, legality, and I think he sort of let them down in a way.
I thought it was embarrassing. I thought that he expressed no remorse for the victims. I thought his answers were comically unbelievable.
And so while there are calls for him to speak to the FBI, there are calls too that Prince Andrew step away from royal duties while all of this is going on, Andrew.
All right, Megan, thank you.
You're welcome.
For more on the aftermath of this interview and what to watch for next, let's bring in James Brooks. He is a royal commentator and he joins me from Sheffield, England. So, James, what kind of crisis has the prince caused for himself with this interview, do you think?
Well, I agree with quite a lot of the statements made there. It really was a, you could say, a car crash interview. That's the word being bandied around here, the phrase being bandied around here in a lot of the newspapers in the UK. It's an incredibly defining saga, both in life but also legacy, and that's the issue for Andrew. No matter whether it's you or I or anybody else, 50 or 100 years away, looking back, this saga really overwhelms all the positive work he's done in the past, and there have been a lot of positives to his work. He helps young entrepreneurs. He's been very vocal about advocating digital tech, but all of that pales in comparison when you look at this saga and the allegations put against him. So it's really the blot against his name in the history books, really, and that's an issue for the royal family overall, because if the shine disappears, then so does some of the affection, and that's what they're keen to avoid. It's quite reminiscent in a way of the 90s, when the royals' personal lives seemed to dominate the papers and the newspaper coverage and the media coverage, and that ultimately then goes on to overshadow their work, and that's what they're very keen to avoid.
Given how basically everybody seems to have said he just didn't look believable in this interview, why do you think he decided to do it?
Well, it's one of those, the questions that are being asked is, did he actually take advice, or did he take his own advice or go against the advice that he was given? I think that will be the interesting thing to listen out for in the coming days once the dust has settled a little bit, is to, well, why did he do it in the first place? Obviously, he wanted to get his own message out there. The unfortunate thing is that the way that he's gone about doing that has completely backfired. And in essence, the palace, Buckingham Palace, like predictable. They like carefully prepared statements. They like to choreograph events. They like photographers in certain places, reporters asking the right questions, because it works for them. And in essence, it helps to avoid something like this. And usually when it's personal, when it involves the personal life of a royal, you usually get a general no comment. The problem is here when a member of the royal family is the one in front of the cameras and is answering very difficult questions about their personal life, that's all thrown into chaos, as we've seen. So headaches at Buckingham Palace, I imagine, at the moment. I imagine their press office is quite a stressful place to be at the moment.
It's generally conceded that the Prince Andrew is a favorite of the Queen. Do you think that this is a blind spot for her? Is he a blind spot for her?
Well, I think the Queen's in a difficult situation because it involves her family directly, and it's hard to take advice from her professional advisors when it's her own son who's in the firing line. And it's hard to just kind of say, well, let's shut him out completely and let's kind of forget about it and hope that it all goes away. You can't really do that, especially when it's your own family and they are intrinsically involved in helping out with royal duties. And I think there's been talk about Prince Charles stepping in to help and advise, but how do you listen to one son over the other? So the Queen's in a difficult situation. She is of that generation, and the expectation that the mantra, the royal mantra, was never complain, never explain. Unfortunately, with something this defining and this that has this much gravity attached to it with the allegations, you can't do that. But unfortunately, the way that it's been handled has just completely fallen apart. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Queen's looking on, kind of thinking, well, what do we do now? It's a can of worms that's been opened, and it's very hard to piece it all back together.
There is talk of Prince Andrew being urged to retire from official duties. Do you think that he should, and how would that work?
Well, I think if you only have to look at the interview, listen to the interview, to know that, well, if he didn't express any remorse or sympathy or feeling for the victims, as lots of people have been saying, well, why would he then turn around and say, well, I'm stepping down from royal duties? In essence, for him, he's expressed regret privately, supposedly, that he didn't make it more clear. But I think it's very much in doubt that he's going to turn around and go, well, you know what, I'll just step back and take a sideline now. I think there's really only two options on that front. The Queen either tells him to stand back and makes it very clear that that's what's happening, or the work dries up. And the work is already starting to wobble and show signs of faltering. We've already started here tonight, here in the UK, that big sponsors of his Pitch at Palace scheme, which is his tech and entrepreneurial scheme, have already started to have discussions about whether they are involved with that scheme anymore. A lot of big sponsors, KPMG, which is a big accountancy firm here, has not renewed their contract. Negative coverage, obviously, of Prince Andrew likely to be a factor of the discussions around that. And there's a lot of charities and organisations already starting to talk about distancing themselves from the Prince. University of Huddersfield, which is one of the unis in the north of England, Prince Andrew is its chancellor, and a lot of the students tonight are actually discussing whether to lobby to get rid of him in that role. So there are already wheels in motion, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that pans out in the next few days.
And is there any talk of criminal liability for the Prince?
Well, he hasn't been charged with anything as yet, so until that fundamentally changes, obviously here in the UK it's an innocent until proven guilty situation. But Andrew did say in the interview that he did over the weekend that push comes to shove, he would testify. I think it'll be, again, it's a waiting game now to see whether that actually happens and whether he has to go and give any legal deposition. But we'll be keeping a strong eye on that, because if that happens, then again that just opens a whole new host of questions. And as we heard in the report there at the beginning, I think this interview, in a way, has given us more questions than it has answers. And so I think a lot of people scratching their heads thinking, well, how does this pan out now? How does it affect the wider royal family, but also Andrew and his own smaller royal family, Princess Beatrice, Eugenie, as royals going forward?
James, good of you to take the time. Thank you very much. Royal commentator James Brooks in Sheffield, England.